Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Jason Buchanan and this is the investor update for Veriglif, of course. We're very happy to that you could join us, and we're very happy to be given this information, of course. We're expecting this to go for about half an hour or so, depending on questions, plus questions, but let's see how we go. James, can I grab the next slide, please?
Yep.
So just before we start, just a bit of housekeeping. As I said, we're going up to an hour, but we'll see how many questions we get. You're on mute, so you'll be hearing from myself and James, who I'll introduce you to shortly. If you've got a question at any point in time from now moving forward, please use the chat box. The chat box you should be able to see on your screen. And we're recording this session, and we'll make this available and send it out via email in a couple of days' time before the end of the rest of this week. Just in terms of today, we're going to go through a couple of different things. The financials funding, of course, most important piece. We're going to give a few details about a patent that was lodged a little while ago, and James will give an update on that. Also an update on where we are product development-wise, and then spend a bit of time talking about the regulatory environment where I guess over the last 18 months or so has swung more and more into Veriglif's favour, but we'll talk about that. And then of course at the end, any questions that you may have, just use the chat box and we'll be able to address each of those as we go. Just so you know who you're talking to, so the voice you're hearing now, that's me, Jason Buchanan. I'm on the right there. I've been with Veriglif since the very beginning. And just a bit about my background. I was lucky enough over the last sort of 15 years to be involved in a number of companies who have been involved in data and data collection and opinions, formerly Research Now and formerly SSI, now called Dynata. And the reason I got involved was simply because having seen and having direct experience with the way that the data and certainly online respondents to surveys, which is a big market we're going after initially, get looked after. There is quite a big hole in the ability to be able to trace certain aspects of privacy and legislation, and of course, as it's become more stringent, the opportunity has become very evident. So that's one of the reasons why I got involved. James, who's the CEO, of course, would you like to a few words about yourself?
Yeah. So look, I've James Wilson. I've been involved in the IT space for over 20 years, but specifically market research for over 10 years now. And one of the concept around Veriglif really spawned out of the need within, I mean, particularly market research, but obviously there's a great application in lots of industries, but in market research, there's real need around getting access to data on individuals. And it's important to do that in a way that's, that represents that makes sure that the individual is taken care of, that we're not misusing their data, that they're aware of how it's being used, and nothing really existed around that. And so this idea spawned out of a company that I used to be involved with, and has grown into Veriglif. And so yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Excellent. James, can we just move to the next slide? Fantastic. I'll let you actually take this next part, James, the financials.
Yeah, sure. So look, we are in the middle of the WeFunder campaign, as many of you will be aware, and we are on track. So when we first started the WeFunder campaign, we expected to be somewhere around the sort of 250 mark, and it looks like that we will end up to raise around 250K. So we're at 240 at the moment. We've got another 2 weeks, so at the end of this month is when the campaign actually closes, but we are on track to raise around 250K. We have been in discussions with 2 funds in the US. One is a particular fund that specializes in seed capital. One of the interesting things about raising funds is it seems as though the whole concept of seed capital has changed dramatically over the years. And those who say they are who are seed investors are typically what used to be round A. And so it has been a challenge to identify funds that do invest in early stage companies like Veriglif before we actually are in revenue. But we have identified 2. We're in advanced discussions with 1, and we have a verbal commitment from them when they finish raising for their 5th fund that they will invest into Veriglif. And so look, it's a verbal commitment, and obviously things can change, but we have been in a discussion with them for a long time. They've told us that they love the idea, love the team, and this is exactly what a fund like theirs should be investing in. The third point there is we are in advanced discussions with another fund, so that is based out of New York. This is a fund, it's kind of a hybrid between they give you funds for your operations, but they also give you R&D resources, so developers in addition as well, and they take equity in their company. And so we've had a number of discussions with them, and we're going to visit them over in New York and present. This is about the third meeting that we've had with them, present to them, and it looks as though there is a strong chance that we'll get funding through that particular channel as well. So there's two good sources of income on the horizon. Plus, we've also obviously got WeFunder, which is closing up. So our goal is still the same. We want to get obviously into revenue as early as possible, and this is the number one question that all of our investors obviously want to ask is when we can expect revenue. And I'll show you a slide. I wonder if, I won't show it just yet, it's in a few slides away, but we are. So the plan is to finish the version 2 of the software at the end of the year. We will be doing some beta trials, and then early next year, we will be in the stage where we can actually use the platform to transact and buy data. And that's the stage when Veriglif actually can start generating revenue once transactions are flowing through the network. And so, yeah, we are on track to continue to earn revenue early next year. I'm just going to go to the next slide, if you don't mind. I'm just going to, sorry, I've just got a message coming through on my phone. Now, just wanted to give you an update on the patent and where we're at with that. Obviously, this is important from protecting the IP that we've got behind this. We have filed a provisional patent in August last year. So it's filed in May, and then it was granted in August last year. And so that has become our priority date. We have done a international application, or PCT as it's called, that was filed last month. There are a few more steps before an international, I mean, there is no concept of an international patent, but there is a few more steps that we need to go through to protect our patent in multiple countries. But it's in the process. So the provisional patent has been filed, international application has been filed, and we're on our way to continuing to ensure that we have protection around this concept. The patent is not around the graphing technology, and it's not around necessarily just applying blockchain to a market research application. It is really around the whole concept of how we validate and link and allow transactions in our network. So we think it's, we believe it's quite novel, and we're going through the process to ensure that we've got protection, and obviously protection for our investors. Now I wanted to give you an update of the actual product. We are building the product right now. Version 1. So we've broken the product into, there's four features in the product. They are linking up a record across, if a record is sitting across multiple sources, we want to be able to link that record to identify that it's the same person. When we talk about validate, we are using that linking mechanism to actually say whether it's a good record. So the more links that are created, the more valid we can say the record are. And that's what we've wrapped up into version 1, those two features of linking and validating. We have been in beta trials for some time now, and we will be doing a webinar on the 24th of September, and we will present the results of that. We've got 3 of our partners have got their data in it. We're waiting for 2 more partners to put some data in, which will be very, very soon, and then we'll present the results on the 24th of September. We have already, because the beta trial has gone longer than we wanted it to, we actually have already started about 4 or 5 weeks ago. We started on version 2 of the software. Now, version 2 is, it allows us actually to generate revenue, but it's around an inventory, or think of an inventory as a catalog, and to be able to actually buy that data. So once we've linked and validated all these consumers across various sources, it's important to know, well, what actually information is available for sale on those individuals, and that's the inventory. And then we need to be able to execute a smart contract to be able to transact and buy the records. And so version 2 has started. Because of the fact that we are about 4 weeks behind schedule, we have actually got, so we've got 4 full-time software developers that were put on about six weeks ago, I think, roughly 6 weeks ago, and a part-time project manager has been put on. And basically what we did is, because at this stage we're on obviously on a tight budget around how we can develop this, we've moved our CTO Phil Denley into temporarily into an advisor role. So we basically said we're going to take his expense and use it for hiring more developers than we would have normally. And so that's probably I guess the biggest change across the business, is that Phil has gone into a advisor role. But the good news is obviously we're using that resource to hire more developers. I have had many CTO roles. I am leading the developers at the moment, and so there was a little bit of overlap as well between Phil and myself, and so that's why it made sense that we use that budget to actually apply to developers. What we really need right now is more developers to get the product finished as quick as we can. Jason, do you want to talk to this one, the original schedule?
Yeah, we'll do that. I just saw notice a question come about the current runway of the funding, which I'll come to after this, I think. So okay. This is a very busy slide. So I'm just going to point out the highlights. We start the journey, even though the Veriglif journey technically started prior to May 2018, or the idea was certainly alive before then. Since then, so if we take since the provisional patent was filed, we had I guess a number of things we wanted to achieve, and we had a timeline that we wanted to hit. And so if we fast forward to today, and of course these slides will be, a recording will be provided afterwards if you wanted to look through each of these parts. But in terms of the highlights where we are today, I guess it's fair to say we're about 4 weeks off the pace that we set ourselves almost 18 months ago. But with James's update just then, what we've done to be able to catch up is added a few more developers than we thought we would have done by this point, which means that we are looking to sort of catch up and I wouldn't say overtake, but certainly catch up to where we thought we would be. The good news is that whilst the beta testing of version 1 is the thing that we're probably behind on, we've actually started some of the development on version 2, which, as you can see down the bottom, October to November 2019. That part of the process, even though it's meant to be scheduled or start from next month onwards, that work has actually already been started. So overall, in terms of the original schedule, as I said, we got ourselves a little bit behind for a couple of different reasons, but we've managed to catch up and probably, I would dare say, by the end of this year, be slightly ahead, James.
Yeah, that's the plan. So I think, look, it's developers was what we needed, and I guess the reasons that we have fallen behind is partly because of the challenges of getting our partners to put data into the network, and just obviously grabbing their time. But it's also just it's basically development resources. So look, our goal originally, or our plan was originally to hire 2 or 3 developers. We've now effectively we've got 4 more developers, and I'm doing part of the development as well. So we've effectively got 5 developers. So we have all confidence that we will catch up, and this is our absolute priority. Obviously, is getting the product finished.
Part of my role is also to liaise with some of the partners, and it did take us a little bit longer to just organise things as things do. The early stage people who were involved, getting to. We probably were a little bit aggressive on how long it would take to get those things organised. Where the exciting thing probably about that is not so much where the beta testing is at, but the caliber and quality of the projects that we've currently got on the background. And obviously we can't give too much away to that, James, but I guess we can give a little bit of a hint about some of those things that we are doing in some of the industries.
Yeah, so we've got the great news is we've got one very large pharmaceutical company who has agreed to do a proof of concept before the end of the year. And it's a few stages that we're going through to do that. So the very first stage is we're working with that company's suppliers, and we're doing a small beta trial to get them familiar with the network and get them comfortable with how they can load their hash data into our network. Once we've done that, then we will explore, and sort of put a detailed scope around what that actual proof of concept is. But this particular pharmaceutical company really wants to use the network for two reasons. One is it allows them to target individuals from new vendors without necessarily having to, or without having to share any personal information. So because of obviously all the information in our network is hashed up, they're able to identify that somebody that they are specifically trying to target resides on a particular vendor without even telling that vendor here's their email address. And so that's one particular reason. The other reason is really around the linkage, right? So being able to see how that one record is shared across multiple suppliers. So sometimes if they're trying to target a particular individual, they may not respond from one supplier, but they do another. They're more engaged with one supplier than another. And so there's a couple of reasons. Probably the third reason is really around using our network as an audit tool or a compliance tool. And we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. But that seems to be a really big issue right now, and it's something that this particular company sees as a great use case of our network, is to be able to prove that their suppliers got permission from their respondents or their people, their consumers, and that they are allowed to use this data for a specific purpose. So that's one company. We've also got a hotel chain group that we are also about to do a pilot with as well. So we are in very early discussions with that particular project, but the goal there is to also use the tool as an audit tool to show that where consent has been given, and to allow them to have an audit tool around, okay, this particular individual said I could use the data for X. So a common theme amongst the two of them, using the network for an audit tool. But the great news is, look, these are very large organizations, very well-known brands. Once we've gone through the process, we will obviously be able to reveal who they are, and we'll use that as a great marketing exercise to give confidence for other brands to be involved.
Great. I also think everyone on this call will want to know, and this leads back to the question that was just asked about with the funding which has been secured through WeFunder, what is the current runway? So at this stage, if we look at from where we are today moving forwards, the path forward that you can currently see on the screen is something that we feel pretty comfortable being able to still achieve. There's some information coming very shortly, which we'll talk a bit more about the compliance and some of the both risks and opportunities that we're being presented with. In terms of the money, James, how would you best describe that? I mean, we're looking at revenues early next year, and the runway that we've got under the current scheme with the current way that we've worked the funds allows us to move, even without revenue, move well into next year. But you might be able to comment more on that.
Yeah, correct. So look, just ignoring all revenue, and obviously, as you just mentioned, our goal is to get into revenue as quick as possible, like all startups. But ignoring any form of revenue, we have a runway of 9 months. So 9 months of, and that is assuming that we don't get any of those. I mean, we have a strong verbal commitment from one fund in Utah, and we're in discussions with one in New York. Without those, and just with the funds that we've raised from our early investors and with WeFunder, we have a 9-month run rate. So worst case scenario, 9 months is our run rate. Obviously, we want revenue as soon as we can, and obviously we're talking to other investors. And so the goal is to raise more, to continue to raise more funds so we can accelerate things. But at our current expenditure and plans, yeah, it's 9 months.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's move to the next slide. I think James might be the way to go. Yeah, so I think let's focus now on some product, and I'm going to hand over to you to look at this before we then move back into the sort of the risks, but more importantly, the opportunities that we think we've got, which will then lead to the revenue. So yeah, do you want to take that away?
Yeah, look, this is just there's a few screenshots here that I'll show you just to show you really what has been built to date. So obviously, most of the actual application of Veriglif is a network, and it is not something that is visual. So often it's hard to show a network in any form of screenshots. But this is, look, one of the ways that we have simplified the process of our partners putting data into the network is we've given this little tool that they run on their desktop and use it to choose a particular file and upload it into the network. And so what it actually does as well is it normalizes the data or standardizes it so that it's in the right format, and then it hashes it up and then pushes it to the API of our network. And so you can imagine for a beta, it's not really practical for our partners to implement the APIs. The APIs exist, but it's difficult for them in a short period of time to implement them. So this particular offline tool was developed to make it easier for them. What you see here is a really quick screenshot of the admin portal. So this is, there's only obviously 4 records in here. There's some dummy data or dummy account that we used here, but this shows you the admin portal of what those partners will see. They can see how many records they've uploaded. They can see the confidence score. So the confidence score is really a measure around how many links there are on each of the records. So in this instance, there's an average of 1.25 links, so other sources that it links up to. And it really, one thing that's useful for them is to see how their confidence score, and the confidence score is going to be a big part of our network. It's going to be how brands will actually choose to purchase records. They may say, I'm not going to buy any records unless the confidence score is there's at least one other match or at least 2 other matches. And so the trend chart just shows how it's changed over time. If they're putting more and more records in, they can see that the confidence score may be going up and down. This page here just shows really how those 4 records are related to each other. And what has been developed that you can't see here is it shows there is another network graph that shows how it relates to other records from other organizations in the network. And so it's just a visualization that will, what we will do is expand it in the future to allow you to traverse across these relationships. So the blue dots here show you the record, the orange dots show you the fields that exist within the record. You can see there, for example, this family name here, there's 2 records there that share, or 3 records that share the same family name. What we'll allow you to do is traverse those and say, okay, I want to see all the records that share the same postal address or the same telephone number or so forth, and traverse through. And that's what the guys are actually, the developers are working on at the moment. And so we'll show you that at a later stage. We have, so that in the network right now, there is over 750,000 records that have been loaded in. And this is partly because of, we've got one particular partner who has almost a record on every single individual across North America. And so we've hashed up some of those data and loaded it in. This shows you part of that view around how the records relate to each other. And look, I guess the idea here is obviously there's nothing you can really see. There's quite a lot of records there, but just to show you how this graphing relationship works and how you're able to traverse from one node to another. And so this is another core feature of the actual platform is a graphing database to say, which we use to link one record from another database to another. And so we don't ever capture all the records into one super record. We leave them where they are, but we show how they are linked and related to each other. It's very important for our suppliers to make sure that their data is not being blended and merged with any other data. It's left as it is, but we create these meta tags or these relationships and show how they are related to one another. And so that's what I wanted to sort of highlight with this large graph here.
Yeah, it's probably worthwhile just talking a bit about that, about how Veriglif doesn't take possession of any data. So we're about to talk about privacy and legislation and compliance for a bit. But one of the reasons why some organizations are getting themselves into a little bit of trouble with their old business models is because, prior to some of the terms you can see on your screen now, GDPR and CCPA, there wasn't any real requirement for companies to treat the data and records that they got hold of in any particular way. It was almost a little bit whatever they wanted to do, cowboy town. But of course, now that the requirements and the legislation has come into place, companies still want to have a way of finding out and discovering more about people, but there's higher levels of requirement for the way that they're able to treat that information. So let's focus on that. And by environment, we're talking about the regulatory environment, and this is probably the area that I think I mentioned in the opening. One of the things that is got me most excited, and if I'm being open and honest, it probably wasn't the biggest thing for me when I first got involved in this idea, but in certainly the last 6 months and certainly the last 3 months, the more organisations that have been spoken to, the more have been proactively prompting this idea of what role can we play in the compliance of what's required for privacy legislation. So let's just break that down for a second. So GDPR is a very European type of legislation. CCPA is very much about California, and they're two very big economies. Of course, if you're an organisation even outside of those jurisdictions, but you want to do business there, which is again a large part of the world, then the way that data is handled is covered, which means that, what it also is happening at the moment is that almost every country, if they're outside of a trading bloc, countries like India, Singapore, Australia, the list is almost endless, is if not contemplating what legislation or privacy legislation they should have in place, they're certainly engaging in the conversation. The challenge for many organisations is going to be that there isn't one sweeping global set of regulations that are going to apply, but many of them are very similar. So GDPR and CCPA, there are some differences. What you can see there, number 2, limits on selling that's personally identifiable information, PII, to others, and the clarity on the use of data. So the right to be forgotten, the right for people to have a say in how their data is used, the right to not have their data used in a way that they wouldn't be comfortable with, are certainly all things that are right in the crosshairs of where this legislation is aiming at. Now, the conversations that have been taking place by a number of people, if you can imagine you're an operations manager or you're involved in some kind of way in customer records or records of people in general, then this legislation is going to hit you and it's going to take up a lot of their time. So by compliance, what we mean is that the onus is on organisations to demonstrate that permissions were given and the correct permissions were given, which of course, if you think about the supply chain, can become extremely complicated at scale and en masse. Now, this is a role that Veriglif is going to be able to play, and this is probably the one that has become the most talked about in recent conversations. And I think I opened by saying that there's not often that that you're working for an organization where legislation is running in your favor. Well, this is one of those examples where, because of the way that we've gone about trying to solve the problems that we've been trying to solve, it just turns out that the legislative environment is also then adding a bit of wind to the sails and sort of heading us in the direction we want to get into. So, James, did you want to add anything to that?
I think it's worthwhile just reiterating what you said around the fact that there is a common thread around all the legislation. I mean, when you look at, I was looking at a presentation yesterday around where all this legislation is coming from, and I mean, it's in India, it's in Canada, it's in Seattle, it's in California, it's in, all these parts of the world are all catching up with the fact that consumers want transparency around how their data is being used. And that's the great advantage that Veriglif has, is that we are given that transparency. I mean, it is white labeled. We go through agencies or suppliers to give that transparency, but nonetheless, the transparency is given to the consumers around how their data is being used, which is one thing that we think is, is the common thread amongst them all, but is one thing that we feel that Veriglif will be able to tackle legislation as it comes on board from or new jurisdictions. We won't have to make a wholesale change to the network as new legislation comes on board. So what we will do is we will obviously record where the individual resides so that we make sure that the appropriate legislation is applied. But we feel strongly that we're in a great position around how the network has already been built to handle and tackle new legislation as it comes on board.
And looking at our risks, I mean, obviously it's something that we're monitoring extremely closely. Like what can change, what are the unknowns that might sort of land in our laps that we haven't foreseen. And the thing that sort of strikes me over this last 18 months or so is that there's nothing that's happened so far that's required us to change tack. Now, obviously, we're not 100% sure about what legislation might be introduced. However, these are CCPA and GDPR are fairly stringent and considered to be the gold standard around the place. And so our expectation is that that would be the minimum standards that will come out around the world, and so we need to be able to address that, which we have. We're constantly being advised by privacy experts and people who are really in the thick of these conversations around what will happen. And so far, all the advice we've been given is that we don't have too much that we need to be concerned about right now, and in the foreseeable future there doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon that's going to come and bite us in the backside, and we'll continue to monitor that extremely closely. So whilst the environment is a risk, we now see it as one of our big opportunities in the places to watch, and strengthens our proposition. And certainly the type of conversation has become far more interesting now, given that organisations have all this information. They want to continue to still use it. They still want to be able to append and target and find and discover, but they need to be able to do that in a way that shows that they're not breaking any legislation, which is a role we can help to play.
Well, I think, look, it's worth mentioning as well that, I mean, look, with any new platform that people are presented with, like Veriglif, so when we go out and talk to some of the brands, it is always difficult. People have their inertia to continue to do what they're doing, regardless of whether something's better or not. And this is in our favour right now. The two brands that are talking to us about pilots right now their motivation to get on board is not these two particular ones. It's not because of all the great features that we're going to have. It is specifically the motivation around why they're doing it right now is how they can comply with the legislation that's coming on board. So it's working in our favour, as we've mentioned, and it's how we feel that we'll get some of the brands to move on this quicker than perhaps we would have been able to without such a motivation.
Wonderful. There is a question that's just come through, James, which I think we're almost at the end of our presentation, which we might start addressing.
Yep, there is just one more slide, but we can come back to that.
Yeah, we might cover that at the end. So do you want to cover this off? How does Veriglif help companies comply with the right to be forgotten?
Yeah, that's a great one. So there's probably, there's two ways around how that is handled. So if you identify yourself as a consumer in our network, so prove that you own a particular email address, etc., and identify yourself and prove that you have it, then you can have a global opt-out within our network. And so that prevents people from even touching your data if they have not already touched it in the first place. So those who are complying and using the Veriglif network will be able to look at a global list of all the consumers who have said, I do not want to be contacted for these purposes. And so that's probably the first thing is, some consumers will never be touched because they've already specified they want to never be touched. They don't want their records ever to be touched. The second way that we do that, and this is part of the reason why, one of the many reasons why we use blockchain, is individuals will have this white label transparency around how their data is being used. So they'll log into, for example, if we stick within the market research space, a respondent, as we call them, belongs to a panel. They will log into their panel and they'll be able to see a list of all of the companies who have ever touched their data. And they'll have the ability within that interface to be able to go, I don't want this particular organization. I've got concerns around how they use it, or I've just heard something about it, whatever reason. They will be able to click a button and request that that data is removed from their system. And so an entry is put into the blockchain that says, this particular individual at this point in time has requested this particular company to remove the information. Now that company has already bought it. There's a record that they've transacted and they've bought that information, but now there's another record in the blockchain saying this individual wants to be forgotten. And what that company will have to do is they'll have to come back within a period of time, put another entry in the blockchain corresponding to that request to say, yes, your request has been granted and we have removed your data from all of our systems and processes and sub-processes. So it's a request that gets stored permanently in the blockchain, and there is another entry that's put in as well to say that that request has been granted. Both of those entries are stored in the blockchain, and so what you're able to then build is a point in time. Like you're able to say, well, this company had the right to use the data at a particular point in time, but after that request, they're no longer able to use it. It needs to be deleted.
There's two terms in there probably worthwhile explaining, James. The first one is around the blockchain. Given that we're using a private blockchain solution as opposed to the public blockchain solution, so maybe just a minute on that. And then secondly, a reminder, I guess, that that we're talking about the frame within Veriglif. So Veriglif doesn't take possession of the data, so there's nothing that Veriglif has to forget. What we're providing is a method and a process and some surety that if someone has in fact declared that they don't want to play for a particular reason, that the network will respect those wishes, because that's been sort of set in, not in stone, but close enough to it. So do you want to just cover off that first part?
Yeah, definitely. So just to reiterate what you said there, we don't keep any of the actual raw data in our network, and in fact we call ourselves like data minimalists. We only keep the minimum information that we need, and it's in a hash encrypted format to identify if one record is the same record on two different sources. So we don't actually even know who the record is. All we know is that it's a match because they have the same hash. And so the actual information is stored outside of our system. And when somebody transacts, they actually get access to the raw information. So obviously that's, if you want to do some analytics or you're about to do some planning before you do some media planning, you're trying to work out who your target audience is. You'll go into the network, you'll buy that information, you'll get a secure link and you'll actually download that raw information and see the actual plain text. So the information doesn't go through our network. The link that you get takes you straight to the vendor that holds that information. But yeah, so really the request around the right to be forgotten is it's transparency to say this particular consumer has said, I want to be forgotten, and if you don't comply to that, then there's also a record to say, well, you never actually marked that you were complicit and agreed and deleted that data. And so obviously there's legislation that is enforceable around how long they've got to do that and the fact that they have to do that in certain jurisdictions. So your second point around what blockchain is or the difference between private and public blockchain. Look, public blockchain has a great use for certain types of transactions, but it's not good at identifying individuals in the network. And so the difference between private and public blockchain, ironically by the name private blockchain, is that individuals who are transacting, or organizations, I should say, who are transacting on the network are identified. So we know who the company is that has bought the information. And that's particularly important for a consumer who wants to see a list of all the people who have bought their data. It's going to be useless if we don't actually know who they are. And so they will actually see the organization name clearly as to because they've been identified in our network. So that's one big difference between a public blockchain and a private blockchain. In a public blockchain, your identity is just a big long string of numbers. There is no name associated with your identity. It's just a random generated big long string of numbers. And so that's the first difference. The second difference is around what information is shared. So in a typical scenario between most businesses is they don't share who they're buying information from, and there's a lot, you control the amount of transparency that you give. And so in the Hyperledger network that we're using, not every single organization who has access to buy the information will be able to see all the transactions that have ever happened only those parties that were involved in the transaction will be able to see the transaction, which is very different to a public blockchain. In a public blockchain, you have access to every single transaction. Now, in most cases, as I said, you don't actually know who it is, but you can see the transactions. In a private blockchain, particularly Hyperledger, we will only show the transactions to the respondent, to the data producer, or the company who is, or in the market research space, we call them panels, and obviously to the brand themselves who have actually bought it. So the three organisations that are involved. So that's, look, there's a lot I can talk about that, but that's probably the two main differences between the two.
Yeah, I think that's worthwhile. The traceability, of course, is something which is key to this whole theme, and just like the right to be forgotten, there is also the right to be rewarded, you know, for effort and ensuring that those who are party to a transaction or you know, creating whatever data assets are leading to some kind of results. It might be a survey, but it might be some other data assets as well. That traceability of, yes, I was involved, and therefore I need to be rewarded for that involvement at the agreed, you know, at what was agreed, and to do that at scale is part of that same side of that coin. I think, you know, the traceability of what people's preferences and what they want, and in fact what they suggest needs to be the case, whether that's to be right to be forgotten, I'm involved. And that's part of where that private blockchain comes in, because it's the traceability element, of course, is what really people want to know. And certainly when it comes to the compliance, and certainly when it comes to those people who are asking us about the compliance, that's really what they want to know.
Definitely.
We might I might just check in to see. There's been a couple of fantastic questions so far. I might just give a couple of more minutes to, here we go. Fantastic, right on time. Has scalability testing been done on the beta version? And if so, what volumes of transactions have been tested? So James, that's a you question.
Yeah. Yeah, so look, one of the questions that's always brought up is around scalability of any blockchain. Think of blockchains as a very slow database, unfortunately. So what we have done to counteract some of the challenges of blockchain is put a caching layer on top of it. And so we use a database that sits on top of the blockchain and caches the information. And so look, we have put in close to 1 million records. We loaded them in via our API as well, so we wanted to see what the experience would be like from an end user who's loaded in a big chunk of data. That, say we've just onboarded somebody. I mean, some of our clients have millions of records, and to onboard them. And so, look, we were able to put in this. So there's roughly, I think it's just under 800,000, and somewhere between 750 and 800,000. I can't remember the exact quantity that have been put into the network. We are still able to query the network in sub 5 millisecond queries. So very, very fast queries to see if two records are related to each other. Look, we have had to change some things during the development around how we handle records. A quick example is we were trying to generate the confidence score in real time. So the confidence score shows all the traversing of the graph to see how many records one record relates to. And so what we realized is that even though the system is fast, once you start getting hundreds of people querying that at the same time, and particularly once we go into the advertising space where you need to respond within 100 milliseconds or you will not be able to serve an ad, we've changed that model now. So only when a record is changed, we have a separate script that runs in the background, updates the confidence score, and then you're able to query the database a lot quicker. So our method of handling the fact that we're dealing with blockchain is that we deal with a layer on top of it. Now, when we're actually doing the final in stage 2 of the network, where we are transacting on records, so if you're buying one particular record and it might be spread across 3 different sources, then you're actually executing three smart contracts. And smart contracts, or any interaction you've got with the blockchain, particularly write operations or update operations, take time. And so we have designed a system that basically caches the transactions and then executes them in a batch. So because we know who the individual is who's made a request to buy data, it's not a problem if we actually execute the actual transaction a few seconds after they've actually used the data. We know who they are, they're not going anywhere, and we can synchronize the actual transaction a few seconds afterwards. So the reason we do that is they can immediately get access to the data, continue on, and the actual payment and so forth like that will happen asynchronously outside of the actual the initial request. So I hope that makes sense. I guess what I'm trying to say is blockchains are challenging, and we have had to build a few new systems to handle the fact that they are a challenge. We have looked at other people who have done similar systems. We've got, obviously IBM has been a great help, and we have looked at this particular caching model was actually adopted from one particular partner who was working with IBM around how they deal with blockchain. So we believe that we will be okay scalability-wise because of that, these caching layers and this delayed transaction process.
What I think is also worth pointing out is that since day one, these issues, which is why it's such a great question, volumes of transactions and the numbers and the volumes of transactions that we're looking at, and the scalability has been part of that conversation from day one. So the whole tech stack has basically been developed around that. James, is that the best way to describe that? You know, it's
yeah, definitely. I mean, we knew that this is a big idea, and IBM have helped us with the scope around how to do this. And look, we know that this is going to be, many hundreds of millions of records and transactions are going to be in this system. And so, look, a lot of my experience has been in that in a former life, in a previous role. I've dealt with databases that are operating on many tens of millions of records a day coming in, and this is a bigger scale, but look, there's a lot of similarities between systems that I've worked on in the past. And so yeah, we have always known that we need to handle scale. We have not put more than 1 million records into the system right now, but we believe that the architecture will handle that. And so, I mean, these are part of the beta trials that will be ongoing while we're still building.
Wonderful. I might just, and please, if you've asked the question and that hasn't quite been answered, please feel free to jump through or clarify anything. I'll just make sure there's not going to be any other questions in real time here. If you're watching this on delay, or please feel free to send any questions you've got through afterwards. And with that in mind, James, we might actually head to that last slide about, we're in a position where, as you said, we've got a runway. So with no revenue, there's a runway for the next at least 9 months, which has been predicted, and we're actually even able to do that. We've taken into consideration the additional developers, and we've got a CFO on board who's been looking at making sure that we don't make any mistakes when it comes to expenses or predictions. So, but obviously, the opportunity, the reason why we went through and did a WeFund raise in the first place is because we did want to invite as many people to be part of this as possible. We are, as James mentioned, talking to some funds, but we saw this as a wonderful way to get more people involved, which means, of course, whilst we've got a runway, the more funds that can be raised, the faster we can develop. So what we do know through this exercise is that people are more likely to co-invest with people who they trust. And what we would just ask is that if there are some people who you'd like to share the opportunity with, please do so. We're certainly in a position where we've achieved what we set out to achieve, which I think has been fantastic. But every little bit will just give us that extra little bit of runway in addition to what we're likely to be able to close down towards the end of this year and early next year. James, you want to add any comments to that?
No, I think you've done a great job. Yeah, look, obviously, the more funds, the faster we can develop is, I guess, the main message here. I mean, there is a window of opportunity, particularly right now around, I think we've laboured it to death around legislation that is given as a window of opportunity. And so, in a perfect world, we would have more funds to really go out and push some of these brands a lot more aggressively, or proactively, or whatever the right term is. And look, we need funds to be able to do that, to be able to put more staff on and to be able to get out there and speak to as many people as we can. So, but look, this is an investor update, and so look, we do definitely. It's worth mentioning as well. We do appreciate the support that we've received to date, and it's been very much accepted and appreciated, the support and the trust that our investors have placed in us by investing. These are personal individuals, largely not organisations in the WeFunder. There are a couple of organisations, but these are individuals, and we definitely appreciate the trust that you've placed in us.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, every single time something comes through, it's fantastic, and the entire team has been thrilled with the response, and the fact that there's a growing number of individuals who are getting involved really has been exciting for us. There's another question that's just come through, which might catch right now, James, which is, are you seeing any serious competitors entering the market?
Look, we are obviously always watching this space, and we have not found anyone that's tackling this particular problem in the exact same way. And look, so there are a lot of organisations. There's probably at least 20 that we are aware of who are really in this personal data is the new oil type world, where they are allowing individuals to monetize their data and and sell that obviously out into a marketplace. The problem with most of them that we have seen is that they are, first of all, they are dealing directly with the consumer, and so they have a real challenge around scale. They have to actually go out to individuals and tell them and market to them and tell them, hey, we've got something great for you to be involved in. And the actual end user is often challenged with, they don't actually know what their data is worth, and so some of the controls that they've been given, we don't think the end user really wants to get involved with. They don't know what their data is worth, and they don't know how to necessarily sell that into a marketplace. And so that's probably the biggest difference that we found with our platform and others, is the others are dealing directly with consumers. We are dealing with the existing ecosystem, and there is already a very large ecosystem of panels, for example, in the market. The main reason we're targeting the market research space right now is there is a pile of panels out there who have already a great relationship with their respondents. They already have an existing relationship of paying them for their opinions and for their time of completing surveys. What will change now is, rather than just paying them for their time to complete surveys, they're paying them to be able to sell their data. And that's how we solve that chicken and the egg problem. And whenever you're creating any form of marketplace, how do you get the suppliers and the consumers to come together? Well, the fact is that in the market research space, there is already an ecosystem that we're all playing with. And so we're not aware. It doesn't mean that there's not one out there, and it doesn't mean someone's not working on an idea right now. We are not aware of anyone who is tackling it in the exact same way. We think that there will be lots that will continue to target directly to the consumer, and that's not our play. So a quick example, without sharing names, is we're aware of one particular company who raised a pile of funds a number of years ago during the ICO days, and is struggling to actually get adoption of people onto their network, because it is, they obviously have to have time to go and build the network, but then to go and target and market these individuals, it is a very expensive exercise to go and build that community base. And so we're leveraging what is already existing. As soon as we have exhausted and brought in this great resource within the market research industry, we will then go out to other industries. And the market research industry will love that as well. They've always been trying to go into the ad space and other industries, and so we will help them do that.
It's also worth suggesting that we are pretty close to a lot of people in market one, which happens to be the market research industry, and we haven't heard about anyone who's trying to do the same thing. And I think what James's comments were there are the things to really remember about Veriglif, which is there are a growing number of organisations. I see a lot of these. I see a lot of people who are organisations who are trying to grow their own assets and their own community. And just based on experience, and I've worked for some companies who have done that successfully over the years, but it's taken an incredible amount of funds and resources to do that. What we are providing is the digital connective tissue that allows them to not only do what they've been doing already and then add that compliance layer, but also then add new capabilities and interact with others in ways that they may never have been able to before. And it is a big idea, but for that reason, I think we've been able to at least now navigate the waters without hearing about too many people who are trying to do the same thing. But obviously something that we're keeping very, very close eye on. In fact, the vast majority of people who seem like they might become a competitor actually end up becoming someone who might become a partner in the ecosystem, which has been fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Now, look, so just to add as well, look, there are organisations in the market research space. Well, there's two organisations in particular. One of those organisations who is using a graphing database to link up records within their own ecosystem. Obviously, the main difference between that particular organisation and ourselves is that they are not going out to every organisation that's out there and linking up the records. And other organisations are competitors with them as well. So they're going to have a real challenge around how they actually graph an individual across multiple sources. So there's one organisation in the market research space that's using a graphing database, but not going out to other suppliers. They're just within their own ecosystem. So what we see various organisations working on various parts of it, but never the whole story. And Veriglif is in a great position to be that sort of, like you said, Jason, that connective tissue amongst all of these various organisations and bring them together in a way where they still compete with each other, but they still get benefits of being able to share data. So some of these competitors will use our network to buy and sell data to each other. And so our network allows them to facilitate that in a way that still allows them to be competitive.
Wonderful. Well, look, we've just reached the hour, James, and that's what we said we'd give everyone's or ask of everyone's time. So there hasn't been any other questions come through. As I said, if you've got a question after seeing this or thinking about it, please don't hesitate to send a message or get in touch. WeFund has a great facility to be able to do that. And that's where we might leave it. Thank you again so much for everyone who's got involved so far. I can't tell you, on behalf of everyone, we can't tell you how thrilled we've been to see so many people want to come and join us and join the ride with us. And so thank you very much. Spread the word. And if you've got any other questions, please don't hesitate to come to us.
Thank you, everybody.